Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Gretchen Jordan, the Alive Association Manager. I'd like to welcome you to today's September edition of Alive Academy about promoting equity within volunteer engagement professionals. And we're very pleased. Our presenter today is Karmit J. Bullman, Esquire. And if you didn't know what Esquire means, it is a professional term with someone that has that is an attorney. And so I looked it up on emilypost.com, all sorts of cool information about how you might address someone in government or with some type of title, et cetera, et cetera. Quite interesting. Regardless, we're going to get started in just a moment, but I want to introduce Karmit. As I said, she's also a member of Alive's Board of Directors, but her primary day job is the executive director for MAVA, which is the Minnesota Association of Volunteer Administrators, and she'll tell you a little bit more about this wonderful survey. You won't see the screen yet because Karmit will be doing the presentation, but I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. So number one, I also have on the call Emily Bauer also from Alive. She is our Vice President of Programs and Advocacy, and she'll be telling you a little bit more about the rest of the Alive Academy sessions we have planned for the rest of the year. But she may also be giving input as well. We are recording this session, so tomorrow you'll get a follow-up email thanking you for coming, with a link to the recording, and then also for a very brief survey. And we'd love to be able to hear back from you, your input to help us plan for professional development webinars that are meaningful and interesting and educational for you. I know we had many people sign up for the call today. Not everyone is on the call yet, and I know it's Friday and things may be happening. So again, everyone will get a link to this recording of the call. And then the other thing about the housekeeping is that there is a question box. And if you have a question, you should all be muted. But if you do have a question, a comment, I'll be monitoring that while Karmit is giving the presentation. So if you want to type in something, I'll make sure and relay that to her. And feel free, please. We do want to have some discussion around this. So if you don't have access to a microphone, if you just type it into that question box, I will see it. So we'll do just a quick test and just to see that you can see or hear me. It would be wonderful if one of the attendees could say, yes, I can at least hear me. If you want to type that into your question box. Yes, Ramona, you're welcome. Great, I'm hearing feedback. So we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to turn the screen over to Karmit. Karmit, you're going to see that request come through.
Yep, okay.
And then you should start your presentation, and also don't forget to share your screen. We see someone on a bicycle. That must be someone you care about.
Oh, okay. So should I go into my materials and get my? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Sorry. I thought you were going to pull. You know what? I don't have it. I thought you would have it. It will take.
Oh, I do, and I can pull it up and run it. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Should I just, so then you'll run it and I'll just say next screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I'll get back. And bear with me a moment. Pull that up. Okay. And you should be able to see my screen.
Yep, we see your screen, just not the presentation yet. There it is. Perfect.
Yeah, there'll be a few seconds of delay when you say, go to the next slide. So just, allow for that. Once you say go to the next slide, just wait a few seconds for the screen to advance. So go right ahead. Thank you, Karmit.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. As Gretchen said, I'm Karmit Bullman, and I have been the Executive Director for the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administration for about 3 years. And MAVA is one of the largest organizations that works on behalf of volunteer engagement professionals in the world, actually. We do a number of professional development activities, connection activities, work with organizations around service enterprise, and we also do studies on various issues that involve volunteerism. So this study was actually something that was requested by many, many volunteer engagement professionals when I first started my job at MAVA. Many people would say MAVA really needs to study why it is that volunteer engagement professionals who appear to have very comparable jobs to human resource professionals, development directors, and program directors, but they're paid less, they're less understood, they're not included in senior executive level type decisions. So what is all that about? So originally, we called this the comparability study. And in fact, Emily and Gretchen were both involved with it as we were seeking to compare volunteer engagement professionals to those 3 other positions. And we really did not know what we would find. So working with a lovely task force, including Emily, we sought to find chief executive officers from nonprofit organizations across the country who would be willing to answer a survey. And we put the survey out and were very surprised to find that within the first few days, close to 500 CEOs answered the survey. So that was, an eye-opener for us that many CEOs wanted to talk about this subject. So Gretchen, you can move on to the next slide. So, like I said, we really didn't know what we would find. We were wondering whether the experience that we've heard about from volunteer engagement professionals would be confirmed. So you can go on to the next one. So the answer to that question was, one more, that yes, the experience that we had heard very frequently from volunteer engagement professionals was confirmed and validated by this survey. So we then wanted to do a deeper dive and talk directly to 25 of the, you can go back to the previous slide, 25 of the people who answered the survey and really find out about some very specific contradictions we saw in the survey. So in addition to the survey that we did with 500 CEOs, about another 25 of them spent about 30 to 40 minutes on the phone with me. And the general outcome of these conversations and the survey was that yes, volunteer engagement professionals are often misunderstood, undervalued, underpaid. There truly are equity issues in how volunteer engagement professionals are received and included, and that there is a true lack of understanding about the essential nature of volunteers and those who lead them. So we can now go on to the next slide. So the first thing we asked of the survey participants was, what qualifications and skills do you think are needed for volunteer engagement professionals? And we were surprised to find that, as you can see from this slide here, the respondents said the qualifications for the 4 positions are generally quite similar. So you'll see the purple here, which is experience developing community partnerships. It's important for all 4 positions, a little bit less so for human resource professionals, but very much so for volunteer engagement professionals, development professionals, and program directors. Having experience building and expanding programs, also very important for at least the three, not a human resource professional, but very important for volunteer engagement, development professional, program service director. The thing that had more of a variance was senior level decision maker. So it was not as important for the respondents that a volunteer engagement professional be a senior level decision maker. More important for a human resource professional, for a development professional, a program service professional. Likewise, in terms of needing a master's degree, much more important for program director, human resource professional, not as important for either volunteer engagement professional or development professional, but definitely least important for volunteer engagement professional. So we'll move on. So, while there are some nuances and variances for the four positions, generally speaking, it appears that the qualifications for all four positions are fairly similar in the eyes and the opinion of the CEOs who responded. So how about the skills needed for the four positions? So if you just glance at this and just look at the colors of the boxes, it looks pretty similar. The four positions really are fairly similar in terms of the skills they are needed. All four positions need policy and procedure development and compliance, need training, needs analysis and implementation, need outstanding written and oral communication skills, need database and tracking system skills, need marketing strategy or design skills, and need to be effective speakers. The only one that seems to be a little bit less needed is for development directors. Don't really need quite as much to have training needs, analysis, and implementation. So we're thinking, well, this is great so far. The CEOs think that volunteer engagement professionals basically need the same qualifications and skills as the other three positions, with the exception of this thought that they don't need to be senior level decision makers. So that was one key finding for us. We can go on to the next one. So the next slide, we'll just wait for it to show up. Still waiting. There we go. The next slide, we dove a little bit deeper and asked some questions about whether for the four positions, they need to serve on the executive leadership team. Do they need to discipline and conduct performance reviews, community outreach? Do all four positions need to report on program progress to the board of directors? Do all four need to develop and maintain a budget? Do they need to educate and provide resources to staff, advise staff, develop risk management plans, establish relationships with external groups, and communicate outcomes data to appropriate staff for internal publications? And generally speaking, if you just glance at these, yeah, all four of these positions, for the most part, need to do those kinds of functionalities and activities. But the one that we focused on, given the data that we got to the previous question, is, does the volunteer engagement professional need to serve on the executive leadership team? And the answer is definitely for program services, yes. So that's the kind of teal color, yes. The answer for development and fundraising professionals is largely yes. The answer for human resource professional Also similar, these numbers are the high 50s to high 60s, for the answer being yes, that's very important for those three positions. But in terms of the volunteer engagement professional, the answer is more in the mid to high 40s. So serving on the leadership team was not seen to be as important for volunteer engagement professionals. You can move forward to the next one. And that seemed very consistent with the answer about skills and qualifications needed for volunteer engagement professionals. So the next question we asked them is, do volunteer engagement professionals need to be involved in the strategic planning process in your organization? And should volunteerism be included in your written strategic plan? So this was a little more encouraging in terms of the similarity between the four positions. Yes, human resources professionals need to be involved in the strategic planning process. So do program directors, development directors, and in fact, less than human resource professionals, but these numbers are all fairly comparable in terms of involvement in the strategic planning process, which makes a lot of sense because volunteer engagement professionals are the ones who are connected with the community, the outside world, so to speak, and should, of course, be involved in the strategic planning process. What I found from a lot of the CEOs that I interviewed afterwards was that involvement is often through a supervisor, through a vice president in the organization. It may not be the volunteer engagement professional, him or herself, being involved in the strategic planning process. So there's an understanding that voice is really important, but that voice might be heard through someone else who is higher up in the organization. In terms of including volunteerism in the written strategic plan, again, fairly comparable in terms of including human resources and volunteerism in the strategic plan, development in the strategic plan, program type stuff. Obviously, you would include that in the strategic plan, and that got the highest number of votes. So again, there was a variety of different answers as to how important it was for volunteer engagement professionals to be part of the whole process and for volunteerism to be included in the written strategic plan. The general sentiment, often being from the CEOs that I personally interviewed, was they don't need to be involved in this, just like they don't need to be on the executive leadership team, because somebody that they report to is involved. So it isn't their job to do that. So that seemed to be the common sentiment. And we can move on to the next one. So we asked in the survey, of the 4 jobs, which job would be eliminated first in difficult budget times? And you can see just by the colors alone that volunteer engagement professional would be eliminated first. So this was no surprise to a number of folks who said, yep, the job here at this organization is the first to go during difficult budget times. You'll see under the box for program director, that is not the first to go. Human resource professional, not necessarily the first to go. And development, less likely to be the first to go. So this, didn't seem to be a real big surprise to a number of people. When I did follow up more with the CEOs, there were some of them who said, hey, that's not how I answered it on the survey. In fact, during hard budget times, the volunteer engagement professional should be the first person to stay because we need somebody to engage community resources to help us do the work that we need to do with fewer staff. And it would be highly short-sighted to eliminate the volunteer engagement professional when we need resources from the community more than ever. Others said, hey, other people can absorb those responsibilities. The human resource person can, or the program director can. So again, kind of highlighting the fact that there's not a real understanding of some of the nuances of what a volunteer engagement professional does, and a thought that it wouldn't be too terribly burdensome to tack those responsibilities on to a program director, a development director, or a human resource director. In fact, many of us know that many volunteer engagement professionals are half volunteer engagement, half development, with the understanding that, perhaps there really isn't a need for a full-time job for volunteer engagement professionals. So let's move on. So this one, I imagine, will not be a surprise to a lot of people. We asked the CEOs, how much do you allocate to volunteerism in your annual budget? And regardless of the size of the organization, and we definitely heard from some nonprofit leaders who had budgets in the millions, one even had an $80 million budget, but generally speaking, all organizations, the majority of organizations rather, allocated under $5,000 to volunteerism. That doesn't include, obviously, the human resources, the volunteer engagement staff, but in terms of budget for professional development, volunteer training, orientation, onboarding, background checks, all the other expenses, equipment, recognition, most organizations allocate under $5,000. Hence, people often saying, I have no budget to be trained by Alive or MAVA or any other organization. My budget is just $1,000 or a couple $1,000. So Gretchen, you can go on to the next one. So this was clearly another finding, not surprising, and affirmed by the CEOs in the survey and in the follow-up interviews that we conducted. So we were also interested to find out which skills are most highly valued in your volunteer engagement professional. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the #1 answer was people skills. So you'll see that teal color there over to the left. We really think our volunteer engagement professionals need great people skills. Some of these other things, organizational skills, database skills, commitment to organizational mission, supervisory skills, program development. They need to be well liked by their coworkers. They need to understand all aspects of the program. They need to be an effective trainer. They need recruitment and retention skills. They may be important, particularly recruitment and retention skills, supervisory skills, and organizational skills, but nothing is as important as people skills. So again, this affirmed some anecdotal stories that we've heard that CEOs and other staff think volunteer engagement professionals are just nice people, and they are, in fact, wonderfully nice people. And that's the most important thing, that they have really good people skills. So this was definitely validated, that this, understanding that CEOs have, that's the most important thing. So we can move on to the next one. Certainly nobody mentioned being a strategic thinker or a senior level decision maker. That was not something that was important. So we asked the question towards the end of the survey, what is your biggest challenge to supporting your organization's volunteer program? So this was a direct question to the CEOs. And it was very interesting to us that the majority opinion was the challenge in our organization is that folks here think that volunteers are easy to recruit and retain. So clearly there's some other challenges, like oftentimes it's hard for the CEO to promote the program because they're so busy, and there may be many other responsibilities. And the volunteer program may not really need a whole lot from the CEO. But generally speaking, there was a definite understanding that there's this perception that volunteers are easy to recruit and retain. And one of the things I learned in the follow-up interviews was the CEOs understood full well that that perception can be changed, and that the CEOs have a huge role to play in changing that perception. A lot of that is messaging. A lot of that is truly understanding what it is that volunteer engagement professionals do and what it takes to recruit and retain volunteers so that they can do their very best work for the organization. So we'll move on to the next one. So here's what we found super interesting, that CEOs think volunteer engagement professionals in their organization are doing an excellent job. You'll see that salmon colored, fantastic, great to know that most think we're doing an excellent job. Many think we're doing a good job. The vast majority think excellent or good. Very few think fair or poor. And then we can move on to the next slide. In addition, CEOs feel that the volunteer program or volunteer engagement at their organization is very valuable to the organization. So you'll see that in this slide, this light blue color here. Volunteerism is very valuable in our organization. So I think that was the number of questions that we asked. You can go on to the next slide. So we were left with, after reading the answers and digesting all of this data from the CEOs, we were very much left with a feeling of what the heck. We did not quite understand the contradiction. And so in my follow-up interviews with the CEOs, I said to them, in the survey, the majority of the folks, almost 500 CEOs who responded, said volunteer engagement professional skills and qualifications are comparable to 3 other key positions in the organization. That volunteerism is very valuable to the organization, that the volunteer engagement professional is doing an excellent job in the organization. However, it is okay in the majority for the volunteer engagement professionals to be the first job to be eliminated during hard budget times, for volunteerism or the volunteer engagement professional not to be included in the executive level leadership team, for volunteerism to be sometimes included in strategic planning, but sometimes not, for the programs themselves to be under-resourced, and for volunteer engagement professionals to be paid less, significantly less than the other 3 professions. So I definitely said, what the heck, to these 25 folks who answered. And I can tell you in a few moments what they said. If you could go on to the next slide. One of the things that the CEOs said quite resoundingly is, yes, there are things we can do about it as CEOs, and we're willing to do things about it, but when are the volunteer engagement professionals going to come to us and ask for what they need? So you can go on to the next one. So that definitely raised for me and those of us who are looking at this study that we basically need to start a movement. So it really is up to us. You can go on to the next one. That the CEOs are willing to join the movement, but they are not going to join the movement until we ourselves are willing to become what I call transformational leaders. So what is a transformational leader? It is somebody who has a vision. It doesn't mean you have to have charisma. It doesn't mean you have to have a particular position in the organization. It does mean you have to have a vision that inspires you about what volunteerism can do for this organization and what this position can look like for this organization. And you have to have the energy and enthusiasm to get things done. So we can go on to the next one. Mava has done a bunch of workshops on what it means to be a transformational leader. And obviously I don't have time today to go into all of those details, but it's really clear that change begins with us. And it is very possible to change things bit by bit till the point where we see that change has actually been quite significant. So next slide, please. So how do we do that? So obviously the first step was having this study done, having participation way across the country. The study has gone out far and wide all over the country and in fact internationally, but there are steps that need to be taken by those of us listening today, those of us who are not CEOs. I'll definitely be talking about what the CEOs said they're willing to do, but we need to create a vision and we need to get followers. Thus, I call it starting a movement. We need to sell that vision. We need to have a good idea about the direction we want to move in. And we also have to be ready to accept failures. And we have to accept that we're in it for the long haul. So even if we move on to a different profession, the work that we do in our current profession, at our current organization, is going to help lay the groundwork for folks who come later and take the position volunteer engagement professional. So if you can go to the next one, it is really on us to start thinking about, do some of the things that you've heard about in this survey today resonate with you? And are you willing to start doing even some small things about it? So I think this is the place where I might ask for some feedback from you all. Yeah, I don't want to talk about top management quite yet. If you could just go forward, and then I'm probably going to have you go back to this slide later, but go forward to the exercise. And then we'll see if we can get some of you to either chat by writing things in your chat box, or Gretchen, if you're able to unmute folks. My question to all of you is, what resonated, if anything, for you in the findings that I talked about? And where might you be willing to advocate? Are you willing, for example, to ask for a job title change? Are you willing to explore why or why not you're included on the executive level team? Is that something that matters? Are you a part-time volunteer engagement professional wishing to advocate for being full-time? Do you desire recognition for more strategy level job duties that you do? Do you want to participate in service enterprise? So let's just start with the question of, did any of this resonate for you in terms of the experience either you or others you know have had in your current or past organization as a volunteer engagement professional?
Carmeet, this is Gretchen. I'm watching the question box, so if you've got a comment you want to type in there, I will see it and read it out to the group. But we've got a small group, and so it'd be easy to unmute someone. There is a button on your GoToWebinar control panel where you can raise your hand. And if you'd like to do that, I can unmute you. If you've got a microphone, you'd like to say something, that's great too. Go ahead. While other folks are thinking, I will say this definitely resonated with me, and I think it's wonderful to be able to have these statistics and this hard data that really cements, what I personally felt and experienced as well, and a great way to be able to confront your supervisor, your CEO or executive director in a good way. Say, look at this research. And to be able to help make your case for this. I'm looking to see, so Mark says, the what the heck part, that sure makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does.
Jennifer Dunham says, I would very much like strategies to get myself included in more senior strategy level job duties.
Great. Let me address Mark's first, and then the strategies, if you can remind me, next. So the what the heck part, it was amazing that many of the CEOs also said what the heck. And when I said, so what do you think is going on here? And some of them, a few that stand out for me, said, generally speaking, volunteer engagement professionals are women, and this is no different than any other second-class citizen type situation. One even equated it to race discrimination. I found that a little extreme, but definitely said, we're going to keep having second-class citizens until we are educated enough to stop it. Another said, in terms of salary equity, that they get dozens and dozens of applicants for volunteer engagement positions. And as long as the market will allow them to pay people less, they're going to keep paying people less. So they do it because they can do it. Many said, we have benchmarks in our field, whether it's the healthcare field or the art field or museum field, and we need to follow our benchmarks. But there haven't been a whole lot of studies showing that volunteer engagement professionals should be strategic decision makers and therefore paid at a higher level. Many of them also said, ask me to change your job title. Nobody's ever asked me. So what I heard from a lot of people, and this is strategy number one to kind of go back to the second question, is make an appointment with your CEO and say, I'd like you to read this study. And Mava's very happy to give you the full study, the executive summary, the one-pager. Just email me and I'm happy to send that out to you. So, but many of them said, nobody has ever sat down with me and advocated for any of this. And so some have sat down and advocated for it with their own supervisor. What the CEO said is, if you're not getting anywhere with your own supervisor, your supervisor and you should come talk to me, because I'm with you on the what the heck, that this really needs to change. And a few of them said, let's look back to how teachers used to be viewed or nurses. And that's really changing because there was an outcry, there was a movement. So it's our turn. So if you want to go back, was there another question or comment?
Yeah, I've got one from Karen Stolt, and she says, I've been struggling to bring my job to the next level. This information will be helpful information to have. When I ask to move to senior management, they ask, what department do I want to move to? I don't want to stay where I am and improve.
So I can address that by saying that a lot of folks have found that the best department is human resources. Some have said reporting directly to the CEO is the most effective. In fact, one of the people who I spent a lot of time with on the phone said, my volunteer engagement professional is the #2 highest paid person in this organization. They have the title Chief Volunteerism or Vice President of Volunteerism, something along that. Some folks call them Chief Volunteerism Officers. Some call them Vice President of Volunteerism. Several said volunteerism has to be one of the top level positions within the organization because volunteers drive everything that happens in this organization. So obviously not all 500 said that, just a couple of them said that. But the fact that some CEOs have that understanding means, there are folks out there that can definitely join this movement. And the strategy has to happen gradually. And it may happen with a job title change. Maybe you are volunteer coordinator and you go to volunteer manager. Maybe you go to volunteer services director. Maybe you go to volunteer services specialist. Ultimately, chief volunteerism officer definitely says this is a person who's an officer, who is a senior executive type position. So I'm not sure that it matters as much what department you're in as that it's really clear what you do. And sometimes job titles really matter. So I would say start there. Does anybody else have any thoughts about where is the best place for a volunteer engagement? What department is the best place for a volunteer engagement professional?
Carmi, while people ponder that question, I have a couple more comments, questions. This is from Katie Campbell. I'm curious how you identified the CEOs to receive the survey. 500 is a great response.
And hello, Katie. I was wondering if that was you. We sent out the request for folks to answer the survey to Volunteer Match, to Alive, to Energized, to the National Council for Nonprofits. So really all the national organizations that we could think of, in addition to all the contacts we have here in Minnesota. And it was not hard to get 500. In fact, we had to shut it off. People were wanting to respond afterwards. So I'm not sure if it was volunteer engagement professionals bringing it to their CEO and saying, here, you have to fill this out. I guess that was it, because when I asked the 25, why are you involved in this? They said, because my volunteer engagement professional staff person wanted me to. Some said, because this is incredibly important, but many did it because they were asked to do it. So again, signifying that advocacy and willingness to be a transformational leader is why we got 500 people. I hope that answers your question.
I've got some more comments. Another one from Jennifer Dunham. I also recognize that two of the other groups we are discussing have really strong national/international level support. I'll throw out some acronyms. I think I know their meanings. So SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resource Managers, and AFP, which is Association of Fundraising Professionals. And while there has been recent effort made towards this with the CVA, which is a certification in volunteer administration, and the NAVE, I don't know what that is. We are years behind. Kermit, perhaps you know what the NAVE is. Maybe I do know it, but I don't.
Well, maybe Katie knows. I know I don't either. Katie, do you know?
Anybody want to type that in there? Oh, thank you. Jennifer says, the National Alliance for Volunteer Engagement. Thank you. The Alliance.
Oh, the Alliance, the one that we're forming? Oh, yeah, and I should tell people about that. So I think the Alliance and Alive are critical to moving the dial. And while it may not be SHRM or, the AFP, we're moving hopefully in that direction. And having this national alliance, which Alive is a critical partner in, is really about these very issues, about going beyond talking to ourselves and having other stakeholders in other sectors advocate with us. So that's why obviously having CEOs and nonprofits all across the country aware of the work we're doing and the need to start a movement, having the philanthropy community involved, having the human resource community involved, education, many other sectors. And that's really what the Alliance is all about. So I agree that it may take years. I think part of the problem is our country also lacks strong dovias in each state. If you don't know what a dovia is, directors of volunteers in agencies, MAVA is a dovia, but we're unique in that we have 6 staff and a full-time VISTA leader, so and a $600,000 budget, which wasn't easy to make happen, and we're working hard to keep it. But if we had organizations like that in every state, it would be so much easier to have then a national organization that supports all of those state organizations. So I think we are moving in baby steps, and I think having people on this webinar, and this is probably about the 8th time I've done this presentation, so your help in getting the word out, either about the study, the executive report, or I'm willing to do webinars and talks to kind of bring this to people's attention, but this stuff's really important, and this is what it will take. So are there other questions, or got one more?
Yeah, I've got some more comments from Marie Davis. I often find that people belittle the decision-making, strategizing, and disciplinary decisions that we have to undertake in managing volunteers. To me, it equates very closely to those that manage paid staff.
Yeah, I mean, there are those who argue that it's harder than paid staff, right? Because, with paid staff, there's expectations, there's things they're supposed to accomplish, and if you need to let them go, you're able to look at, here were the expectations, you didn't do it. With a volunteer, it takes really unique skill to be able to either change the job that they're doing so that they're doing something that's a better fit for them and the organization, or discipline them, tell them that things have to change or they'll be removed, or ultimately remove them. It takes a tremendous amount of skill to do that, because they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing this because of passion and because of purpose that it creates for them. And in many cases, supervising, disciplining, firing a volunteer is an absolutely heartbreaking decision both for the volunteer and for the person who has to do it. So folks don't understand it until they've been there themselves and done that. And so this is part of the visibility we're working on.
Thank you. Carmine, I've got a series of comments and questions, and I'll just put them all together, but it's hard for me to copy and paste them all together.
Okay.
This is from Ramona Toussaint, and she says, I think the best place is with development, not programs, and she would like to create a report to show the comparisons. How would I go about this? Ramona also goes on, I've asked for a salary increase and explained that I'm doing the job of 3 people, volunteer manager, program manager, and project manager. I just don't know where to start in creating a report. And I have, however, showed the potential and work that needs to be done on the role and moved my position from part-time to full-time. I'm asking the question, since I report to a committee of a board, how do I get the board to see more value in my position? How do I get them to see the value of what I do? I cleared my salary and program fees this year. I'm the only employee supervised by a volunteer board, and that she would love to see a copy of the full study.
Yeah, I think if you can email me, and I'll share the email at the end of the presentation, sharing the full study, the executive summary, the one-pager with the people that you report to is a really important first step. And there are other studies. So the full study does include the other studies that were done in the past that do a lot of the advocacy for you. So I think data talks, and definitely the CEO said that to me, show me the data. And so definitely look at the end of the full report. There's a number of other reports that were done earlier in time that also have some really great language that can help you with your advocacy. The other thing that I'd say that I'd highly recommend that you keep the conversation going, and maybe you can talk, Gretchen, about the listserv that Alive moderates, because there are so many folks who have very effectively advocated, and sharing from folks who really have moved the dial and hearing from them is going to be, I think, more effective than, some of the thoughts that I have. So do you want to maybe just put that in the chat section, Gretchen, to talk about the listserv that a lot of people don't know about? Yeah.
You bet.
And given time, I'm wondering if I can go back to the past slide, because it may answer some other questions, and then I'm happy. I've got about 10 minutes left, or a little less.
That's right.
Happy to answer the rest of the questions, but I want to make sure that we cover these last few slides. Okay, so this slide talks about how top management can make change. And these were actually the things that folks said they think need to be done by CEOs and other top leaders. So make the position essential by articulating the connection between volunteers and development. Because obviously the top level decision makers in your organization care an awful lot about the money that comes into the organization. So making the connection between volunteers and financial sustainability is an argument that top management can make. And also the strategic role of volunteers in all programs. So it really is on top management. I mean, that's one of the great things about service enterprise, is one of the important strategies in service enterprise is having top management be a real cheerleader for the strategic role of volunteers in the organization. The CEOs definitely saw how placing the VEP on the executive team is an important move. Many of them said, we can't have everybody on the executive team. Typically, it's only 3, 4, maybe 5 people, depending on the size of the organization. But many of them are willing to say, no, I'm not willing to put them on the executive team, but I'm willing to give them an agenda item and have them come once a month to report and get feedback. And I thought that was a really good compromise. Positioning the VEP as a subject matter expert is really something that CEOs can do. We talked earlier about changing the way the position is titled. Another thing that CEOs recognized, and we all know this, that language matters, and that for everybody to start talking differently. Some even call volunteers time donors. They don't say volunteers anymore. Many are eliminating the term volunteer program because volunteers are a critical resource. So they're saying volunteer engagement instead. And then again, considering a program like Service Enterprise, where we really look at involving volunteers in all levels and all places throughout the organization. So Gretchen, I'll have you go 2 slides forward. So some of these are the things that, with help from volunteer engagement professionals, CEOs definitely sounded interested and willing to do. If I were to say there's one strategy that I would recommend the most, that would be involve your organization in becoming a service enterprise. I would say that if your state does not have service enterprise, then contact Points of Light and ask which is the closest state that does have a service enterprise hub. In Minnesota, we now have 50 service enterprise organizations, and the things that are happening in these service enterprise organizations are extraordinary. And many of them would say, this survey doesn't apply to me, because none of that is true. I'm paid extremely well. I got a great title. Volunteerism is visible everywhere. I'm considered a strategic and senior level decision maker. A lot of this they would attribute to service enterprise. So, you know, if I were to like abbreviate all of this into one strategy, I'd say look into service enterprise. How about the next slide? So there are also smaller steps that you can take within your organization. You can definitely work on being seen as a strategic and transformational leader. One of the first steps to doing that is sharing this study with your senior leaders. You know, advocating for a different job title. Problem solving with top decision makers on how's the best way that the volunteer voice can be heard throughout the organization. Make sure that you do training of other staff so that folks really understand what goes into effective volunteerism. Make sure that you yourself are working on your own credentials to be seen as a professional. CVA, for example. Next slide, please. So there are definitely things that can be done, and if you're hitting your head against the wall and trying to do some of these things, maybe pick a different thing. Maybe too much change is too much, but maybe something that's slightly smaller and easier to grasp would be a good way to start. This next slide is just the Service Enterprise Wheel. If you don't know much about Service Enterprise, I'll say go on the Points of Light website and learn about it, so we can probably just move on to the next one. And again, my general thought that Service Enterprise is the answer to it all. So there are some things you can do in your local community Like, I'm hoping that you have a local professional networking group, a local network of volunteer engagement professionals. Um, I'm hoping you have a council for nonprofits that could maybe work with you on salary equity. So there are things you can do on a local level. Next slide, please. There are things you can definitely do on a state level. So MAVA has a bill at the legislature. Happy if you email me to share what that bill is. We're going to be, year 3 working on trying to get it passed. But it's really important that the state legislature put some money into volunteerism. This is my shameless plug to join Alive. We're always looking for board members. So these are some major impact things that you can do. Share this report, become a board member for Alive, work on a local volunteerism bill. And this might be the last slide. The next one.
It is indeed the last slide, and I think Emily was going to follow up with these announcements. So, Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Really quick, you can see right here we have some announcements. The really relevant announcement that I want to make is that not listed here is the it's another November Alive Academy, and it's very, very relevant to what Carmeet has presented today. And by the way, thank you, Carmeet. When she talked about what we can do, one of the things that we can do, of course, is to contact us and get on our listserv, our cyber VPN. But another thing is about connecting with our local Dovias, our local groups. And Carmeet has been kind enough to volunteer to do another presentation for us in our Alive Academy on November 29th. And that will be how you can start a Dovia or a local group in your community if you don't have one. And that's really, really important. So I really hope that if you don't have a local group where you can start sharing on how to advocate and how to support each other, that you attend the November, both the November 1st one, but also that November 29th Alive Academy by Carmeet. Thank you again, Carmeet, on how to start your own local group. Everything else is there, and I just want to thank you, Carmeet. Thank you, Gretchen, for doing this, for coordinating this, and thank you all of you who have attended. I hope you got something out of this. I know I did.
And if you could put the last slide up, it has my email address, and I'm happy if you want me to send you any of the reports or a copy of the bill, just email me. And probably early next week, I'll be able to get that out to you.
And just quickly, I'll keep the webinar open for a few more minutes. But if you wanted to download the slide deck, it is in your handout section. I sent a message through the question box earlier. But tomorrow you will get an email following up with a link to the recording. And as well as if you have any other questions, I'll include contact information for Carmeet and for Alive, so you can check on our homepage, on our calendar. But everyone on the call today are Alive members, and thank you for being members. And you can find out more information about our upcoming events, and of course, we'll be sending you notices about that too. And if you want to take a few moments tomorrow when you get that email to give us some feedback, that will really help us plan for future Alive Academy webinars. And again, thank you so much for your time on a Friday afternoon, Carmeet. We sure appreciate the work that you are doing with MAVA. This is very needed information. And I would just ask everybody, before you go home today, maybe share this with one other person that you know, share it within your local association, within your local professional development network, share it on your LinkedIn page, share it on your Twitter account, share it with your staff, perhaps you've got more than one person that you work with to manage volunteers in your program. Share it with them. So I would just ask, before you go home at the end of the day, share it with one person. And again, just thank you, and thank you, Emily, for your work on the Advocacy and Programs Committee to bring these great programs for our members.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Have a great Friday, all. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.